Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, Israel gears up for war with Hezbollah as Benjamin Netanyahu warns Iran is on the march throughout the Middle East. And a major cultural shift as the Supreme Court rules that ultra-Orthodox citizens should be included in the military draft. Plus, walking away from a Nazi heritage. A young German man spends his energies ministering to new immigrants and Holocaust victims. And Nova Music Festival survivors healing together. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. A peace deal could possibly avert a war between Israel and Hezbollah, but the amount of firepower assembling on Israel's northern border suggests that war could start any day. Meanwhile, survivors of the Nova Music Festival gathered to celebrate being alive and to declare victory over Hamas's culture of death. Paul Strand has the story.
Israeli troops continue gathering and preparing on the border with Lebanon for what could soon be full-on war. Their purpose is to stop Hezbollah terrorists who've been attacking northern Israel from Lebanon almost daily for months. That's forced some 80,000 Israelis to flee their homes and empty out whole communities.
Living right now in Kiryat Shmona is very sad. The city is empty most of the time.
Hezbollah hit the north with some 40 rockets Thursday, saying it was to avenge a number of recent Israeli strikes on the terrorist group. As the war against Hamas grinds on in Gaza and tensions mount in the north, Israel's prime minister keeps trying to draw the world's attention to Iran, the massive power behind Hezbollah, Hamas, and other groups. Benjamin Netanyahu is warning Iran and his proxies are, quote, on the march to conquer the Middle East. Visiting the north, Israel's President Isaac Herzog complained the international community is doing little to stave off war. So he said it shouldn't be surprised if, quote, the situation spirals out of control. Even as Israel braces for what could be another massive and painful war, survivors of the Hamas sneak attacks at the Nova Music Festival on October 7th came together Thursday in exuberant defiance of terrorism. It was their first mass gathering since the brutal assaults. Nimrod Arnin's sister was among the more than 360 killed there.
On that Saturday at the beginning of October, our light was put to the test, a test which in our worst nightmares we didn't imagine we will have to pass.
On stage, dancers reenacted the horror of that morning. And on the ground, tens of thousands stood in a long moment of silence to commemorate all who were lost. But the main message of the day? Israelis will not let the terrorists steal away their full embrace of life, their joy, their dance.
Nothing can stop us from living our lives here in Israel, and nothing can stop us from keep on dancing and living.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Israel's Supreme Court made a unanimous decision this week, which could set off a political earthquake. It concerns including the ultra-Orthodox in the military draft. To break it down and explain some of the history is Rabbi Dov Lipman, who comes from the world of Israeli politics.
When the State of Israel was founded, there was a group of ultra-Orthodox who were against the idea of a mandatory draft for all young men. And they worked out a deal that 400 elite scholars would focus exclusively on their religious studies. And that would be basically the spiritual, a source of spiritual blessing for the army, for the country, and would preserve this idea of a small group that studies the religious texts all the time in a Jewish state which certainly values the study of the Jewish religious texts. But what has happened over the last 76 years is that small group of 400 elite scholars has now become 65,000 young men who claim that they're studying the religious texts and therefore are exempt from military service. And broader Israel said that there needs to be equality. How can there be tens of thousands who are being exempt from military service when everyone else is serving? And the Supreme Court heard those complaints and said, yes, there needs to be equality. The idea that a small group will focus on their religious studies, that makes sense. That's a value for the country. But the idea that an entire population, which has grown significantly, gets exempt, that's not acceptable. And that's what the Supreme Court ruled. And they basically said the Knesset is required to pass legislation that provides equality, where everyone is serving the country. Now, the reason why this is a challenge is because in Netanyahu's governing coalition, he has ultra-Orthodox parties that he needs in order to have a majority. They are against the idea of expanding the draft to include their young men, and that's where we have this collision between the Supreme Court on the one hand demanding equality of some kind, and parties in Netanyahu's government that are saying, we don't want to yield on this issue. We want all of our young men to get this exemption. And at the moment, the Supreme Court ruling is everyone gets drafted. Until you come with a law that shows equality, everyone gets drafted. There's no way these ultra-Orthodox parties can stay in a government where that's the government policy, and that could collapse the government and lead to a new election.
Up next, news analysis with CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl in our studio. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. I'm joined here in studio with Julie Stahl, CBN Middle East correspondent, here in our studio. Julie, I've been gone for about 10 days. A lot has happened.
Yeah, welcome back, Chris.
It's great to be back.
So tell us, in the United States, what's the perception? What did you sense? What's the perception of people there of what's going on here?
I had two things, Julie. First of all, I think among some people, and I did meet some people that watch Jerusalem Dateline, and they had an understanding of what's going on. But I felt for some people there's unawareness of what is going on here in the Middle East. And the second thing is, I think, an unawareness of how important what's happening here is to the West, and particularly to the United States. It's not just the Israel problem, it's a global problem, and it's this idea of a radical Islam that really has a goal of a global caliphate. And I think people don't understand that.
Yeah, they don't relate to it as being something, and it's over there, it's over there.
That's right.
But it's like right on the doorstep.
Exactly. We just heard from Rabbi Dov Lippin about the draft bill. Tell us why that's so important here in Israel.
Well, it has the possibility. We were saying that, the lay of the land right now is kind of looking like it was before the war, where you've got these giant protests going on. Now you've got the Supreme Court weighing in with something that could possibly bring down the government, because Netanyahu's coalition partners are so many religious parties, yeah. And there's this tension between them about these 65,000 young Haredi men serving in the army, and while everybody else's sons and husbands are serving in the army, are laying their lives down, are getting killed or wounded, and the Haredim aren't serving, and they think they're serving, but it could create again this tension in the political realm.
Right. And people should be aware that this is an issue that's been going on for years, and they've never been able to come to a compromise that kind of appeases both the religious and the secular.
Yeah, that's true. It's true, yeah.
Yeah. So now, what's happening in Gaza? We see that things are, quote unquote, winding down. Not that it's stopped in Gaza, but it's not as intense as it was.
Yeah, it's not as intense as it was, but like we said, soldiers are still dying there. There's a lot of unrest there. There's still, the army has had to go back to some of the places where they had left, because as the people go back to their homes, Hamas also goes back to those places. Mm-hmm. So I think probably one of the big issues is what's going to happen at the end of the war there? Is it going to really be the end? You know, are things going to change? Who's going to rule in Gaza? Is Israel going to stay there? There's a lot of questions that need to be resolved.
Right. What's going to happen the quote day after?
Yeah.
And the Biden administration is really pushing for a two-state solution. How does that play here in Israel?
Well, you know, and Israel doesn't want to rule the Palestinians. They're not trying to do that. But there's, you know, it's not really a feasible thing. Like, who's going to be the other? Who's going to rule the Palestinians?
Right, Palestinian Authority.
Right.
People reject that.
Right. Yeah, because they've been corrupt. They've been corrupt. They haven't managed the people. The Palestinians themselves don't really like the Palestinian Authority. That's why they voted Hamas in Gaza, which wasn't the best idea. So yeah, that it's not really a workable solution.
Right. I think the biggest story of all right now is, as the war against Hamas in Gaza winds down, is the potential war in the north. And it's not as if to say there hasn't been a war going on since October 8th.
Yeah.
But right now there's an anticipation of a much bigger war, a much more deadly and dangerous war up in the north.
Yeah. You know, it's Lebanon's a bigger place. It's a country. So if Israel is going to war with Hezbollah, technically it's going to war with Lebanon. I think probably there's a lot of Lebanese that don't really want that to happen. They're not necessarily in favor of Hezbollah, but Hezbollah's got power in Lebanon also. So it's really it's a very tense situation. You have tens of thousands of Israelis who've basically had to push hold for their lives up north. You know, they've moved out of their homes. They don't have their jobs. What are they going to do? They can't send their kids to school. So they are really in a stuck position, and they don't want to move back there and just have a little fence between them and Hezbollah. It's not workable.
And last question, the last issue is, overarching all of this is Iran, really the head of the snake.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Iran's behind it all with its stated goal of wiping Israel off the map, and you know, and establishing its Shiite Islam in the Middle East. You know, they want to conquer also Saudi Arabia. They want to be in control here, and they're using their terror proxies, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis or other militias, to do it, and it's deadly. Also to Israel, also to the United States.
Yeah, I think the U.S. needs to realize that. Unfortunately, the Biden administration seems to have a policy of appeasing Iran, that giving money to Iran, which seems to fuel all the things that are happening. Yeah. Julie, thanks for joining us. Great to be back.
Yeah, good to have you back, believe me.
And what we talked about gives people a lot of things to pray for the government here and for the whole wider Middle East.
Still ahead, forging a different path, the grandson of a Nazi officer tells his story.
Do the choices of your ancestors have to define you? The man in our next interview decided that they don't. And he explained to Julie Stahl what motivates him to help Israeli immigrants and Holocaust survivors. Take a look.
Alexander Dietze, welcome to Jerusalem Dateline.
Thank you.
You are born in Germany.
Yes.
You grew up knowing a little bit about history of your country, learning in school, and then you became a Christian in your early 20s, and then you had a big surprise. Tell us what it was.
A very big surprise. My grandfather, he had a special gift for me. And, my grandfather, he taught me bicycle. He taught me swimming, so I was very close to him. But he wanted to give me his Nazi medals as a heritage. And suddenly, my whole perspective of my grandfather, Granddad, what's that? I mean, seeing all the symbols that I was always finding in my past, they were suddenly in his hands. He never spoke. In Germany in general, the people don't speak about the Holocaust. And this was a big shout in my heart and in my soul that I heard, and from there, my journey began.
So how did that affect your looking, the way you looked at the Jewish people, the Holocaust?
Yeah, of course, when you come to faith, suddenly I saw, what is this Israel and Israel and Jerusalem, and it was interesting. But when this happened, it came to the past, the 70 years, not the 2,000 years. So 70 years. So suddenly I found myself with a responsibility of kind of looking in. But the key moment was when I had a friend from Israel who came to the Christians to talk about God's heart for Israel. And he said something profound. He said, what the devil meant for evil, God can turn out for good. Can turn out.
Now, and your wife also had played a part in this too, didn't she?
She found out that there are in Israel in this time 250,000 Holocaust survivors that are still living in Israel, and they're very poor because they're coming from the ex-Soviet Union. When they come, they lose everything. They are maybe academics and teachers, and they start with cleaning toilets. It was a big wow. So we found an organization to invest everything to help the elderly, the Holocaust survivors that were children in the Holocaust, now immigrated to Israel, and to support them in different ways.
And how did they respond to you?
I have the grandson, Mantle. It's easier for them to relate with me as with the old elderly generations of German. It's really the little gap of grandson, because they can differentiate. They always say, it was not you. And I have to say, yes, but we have a responsibility, and we do it out of free will. So we never had rejection. In the opposite, I say always, I have in Israel maybe now 50 grandmas and 50 Jewish granddads.
Wow. And one of them gave you a special present one time.
Yes. After the event with my grandfather and after a long journey that brought us to Israel, it was at an event, a very dear Holocaust survivor. She is the leader of an organization who takes care of thousands of Holocaust survivors. She said, I brought a very special gift for you, Alex. And she opened up a little box, and inside it was a medal over 75 years victory over Nazi Germany. Wow. And from there, I connected the circle to my grandfather. I rejected his heritage of my physical grandfather, but I accepted with honor the heritage of my Jewish grandma. And this was a circle that was closed in a way. I saw the purpose of our being here, supporting Israel, supporting the elderly and the Holocaust survivors, in the responsibility we have as Germans, as believers. And this is what we're running for.
That's a very inspiring story. Thank you so much, Alexander Dietze, for joining us on Jerusalem Dateline.
Thank you for having me.
When we come back, Healing Together, Nova Music Festival survivors rebuild through community.
As shown earlier in our program, the survivors of the Nova Music Festival massacre are still putting their lives back together. Paul Stern reports on one way Nova survivors are healing, by finding solace in community.
More than 3,000 revelers gathered last October at the Nova Music Festival in Israel, just outside Gaza. And more than 360 of them died October 7th, when Hamas and other terrorists rampaged through the festival grounds, killing, raping, and taking hostages. Survivors still to this day face pain, anguish, and trauma that make tackling normal life again seem almost too daunting. like for Hila, who ran for 5 hours to escape the brutal terrorist October 7th.
There's still breakdowns, I call that, a panic attack, a blocking in the mind.
A loose-knit group called the Tribe of Nova Community has come up with all sorts of services and activities to help these survivors do more than just survive, but thrive and dance and enjoy life again.
We just together to take care of each other, to get better in the mental health, just not to be alone.
Sivan lost the love of her life that murderous October 7th.
He gave his life so I could live. He saved 6 more people, not including myself. I could have chosen the easy solution and continue to bury myself in bed, but I chose life. I choose to continue and to be out and dance for him as well.
Though his body was riddled with bullets, Sivan's partner drove her and a group of other survivors to safety before he died.
I felt his hand protecting me. With all this, he was still driving. He was shot all over his body, and I felt his hand protecting me.
The Friends of Nova Community helped bring Sivan back to life and to recovery from her wounds and to the dance.
I'm dancing for 2, and after being shot in the leg, I come here and come back to dance and be happy and meet friends.
I need to dance again. We have to dance again, not only for me, for all the people that I lost. I lost more than 6 friends to the Nova Music Festival. 3 of my friends are still holding hostages in Gaza.
Hila and Sivan dive into all that the Tribe of Nova Community brings them, like a once-a-week get-together by a Tel Aviv lake. They garden, explore therapies, get psychological counseling, and party again, together.
The community, the very special people, beautiful inside and out, are the ones who basically bring me back to life.
I'm much better. I'm going out, I can dance, I can smile.
I think this is our victory, and it is true that there are still people who are held hostage and they go through hell every day, but that does not mean that Hamas has defeated us.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and you can access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And remember to sign up for our email blasts, and please continue to pray that God would thwart the plans of evil men and make a way for the hostages to come home. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.